Oh, and before we do that, excuse me, sorry, Mr. Thompson wanted to make an announcement.
I just want to make sure that everybody knows that the office that I have is on the east end of Route 66. And Jeff has said that there's not going to be a lot of discussion about that area, but if there is, then I will not be a part of that. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows that. Thank you.
And also welcome Mr. Fisher. Mr. Wood.
First off, undertaking this project was huge, and the fact that you guys got as far as you did in this amount of time is pretty amazing. But, there's a lot of things that take into consideration, and I do have some, not close enough.
Yeah, thank you.
Very good. All right. I feel like Madonna here with this screen.
Make sure that it's recorded.
Okay, one question, not one question, I got a lot of questions. One of the things that's talked about quite a bit in the specific plan is the streetscape plan. And as I take a look at what has happened on Route 66, I sometimes wonder if maybe there should not be more emphasis put on the streetscape in order to entice development to come into Glendora and develop on Route 66. If they had something that was more desirable in the first place, it seems as though what we're doing is we're trying to bring the development in and then doing those streetscapes after the fact. And again, I just wonder if that's something that maybe we should consider, that it's been 13 years and I really don't think we've done a whole lot of the type of streetscapes that were recommended in the plan in absence of any development. It was not really, over 13 years, I would have liked to have seen that we were doing things so that at least start that process now, so that 13 years from now, we're not sitting with the same street signs and landscaping and so on and so forth that we had 13 years ago.
I guess just an observation. I think what the city quickly realized after the adoption of the plan is they had no money. They had no money to plant the trees, had no money for the median improvements, the signage. While the report indicated, I think solidly indicated that redevelopment was going to step forward, what the city had planned on, because the project area that this all fell into, they were gambling on the ability to get that project life and monetary cap lifted. We actually went through a lawsuit with the county that did not transpire. So they had no money in which to effectuate the RDA aspect of that. So while I don't think we would disagree from staff that it's an important element to help attract, it's still going to boil back down to where's the money for that to happen, because that is expensive work to do from the standpoint. As we balance all the other needs, road repairs, bathrooms and parks, you name it, there's a lot of demands that the council is being asked for. And so it's just something we're going to have to revisit that. But I think that that's what we realized pretty quickly is there wasn't really any money to start that work after this project.
You brought up redevelopment, and Jeff, you made a comment about the property on the corner of Amelia and Route 66 being owned by the redevelopment. Explain to me what that means. I mean, redevelopment has went away, okay? If redevelopment owns that building, what does that mean to us as a city government and as citizens of Glendora right now? Who owns these properties that redevelopment owns, and what, if anything, can be done with them?
All of the properties of the redevelopment agency, maybe I use the wrong term, it's actually the successor to the redevelopment agency, which is the city of Glendora, is now the owner of those properties. And all of the properties that were owned by the former redevelopment agency were, there was a long-range property management plan submitted to the State Department of Finance, which the Department of Finance approved, and it placed properties that the city owned or the agency owned in really two or three categories. Either three, one was, is this a housing asset? Is it something that can be for government use, like the parking lots that the city owns in the village, or the redevelopment agency owned in the village, or is this property available for development? There were several properties, including this one, that were categorized as being held for resale or to sell for development. So we've got that approved by the state, so now when we want to sell it, we can sell the property for some types of development, or sell it right now if it's more owned.
Are there any other properties in the Route 66 specific plan area
Yes.
that we do own?
Yeah, there's a property, 3 parcels at the northeast corner of Parker and Route 66, which is right across from the Leadership School. It's sort of L shapes around the restaurant that's on the corner. Yeah, El Amigos.
One of the things that I think of, we take a look and we talked a lot about development incentives, and we gave density incentives and height incentives and things like that. What other types of development incentives do you think are available that may help in order to bring development into town?
That's a good question. I mean, anytime one is automatically, it's in some way granting the developer more development capacity on the site. There are, you can look at things as economic incentives directly, like if you want to do things like waiving fees for certain things, it's something that's desirable. You can, parking reductions we're seeing as an incentive for development, because parking takes up a lot of real estate. It's almost 100 square feet or something for each parking space. That's the property that you can't develop. So doing things like that is part of it. And I think there's probably other things out there that other communities and people working in planning circles are doing. I think that's part of what we have to do.
And I would just add, I think the incentive question is really going to be driven more by the end use. The incentive needed maybe for office can be different than retail and mixed use, residential. So I think that is going to be part of the dialogue for the next phase, is looking at what are the end uses possible for this corridor. And then what are the hurdles to those end uses in some of these sub-districts, and then talking to people that actually put money into this and saying, okay, what does it take for that, and where is the gap that may or may not exist at this point, and what does it take to make that gap even so that a transaction can occur. So I think we have to just be open to looking at what the use is, because parking may be non-starter for an office, for example, as opposed to retail. Using on-street parking as a credit or something like that. Waiving fees may be something different. So I think it's a bigger question that we're just going to have, hopefully with the indulgence of everybody, to see from the end use how that lines up, if at all. And then you as a council and the community are going to have to weigh, is that an acceptable incentive for what you get at the end of the day, or what you think you'll get at the end of the day.
Madam Mayor, if I could comment on that, because I think there's a piece being left out, and that is the gathering together of parcels. I think one of the major considerations when the incentive part came into being was that we've got, as you can see, as you look at that map, they're just lots of little parcels. And so pulling those parcels together, there was incentive to do that. And to me, and part of the discussion is, how do we incentivize without giving away the store to bring parcels together so that we don't have a bunch of little strip malls? Because I don't think that was the plan of the Route 66 committee, was to have a bunch of little strip malls along the way. It was to say, if you can buy properties and, what's the word I'm struggling?
Consolidate.
Consolidate the various parcels, then you have something sizable that you can actually build something on. So I think that has to be part of the overall discussion.
I guess the question I have for that, and again, just throwing ideas out there, because that's what this is all about, is, you know, is there something that the city could do that would make it easier for somebody to consolidate properties together? Or the possibility of, as you mentioned, waiving fees or reducing fees to the city? I look at when we're looking at development, the immediate income that comes into the city for development, to weigh the difference between the immediate income that comes into us as opposed to the long-term income. If we can provide something that's going to create a number of more jobs that people are going to be working here in town and staying here and spending their money here, looking at that overall income as opposed to the immediate income that's coming in. So I'm just wondering if maybe that might be part of the discussion in the future, looking at those types of incentives as opposed to putting, you know, more people per acre in bigger lots or smaller, more density. The other question I have, we're talking about parking. Can you explain to me what a parking in lieu of fee is?
Yeah, I think that does come out of the specific plan. There's some language in there about, I think there were ideas that must have been floated in the development of the specific plan that I think envisioned in some way public parking to some degree on the corridor. And I think there's reductions for if you are near a parking structure on the corridor within the specific plan, or instead of providing parking on site, you pay a fee in lieu of providing parking, because in theory, you are going to pay for the construction or the maintenance of a public or communally shared parking facility. So that is what I believe that language in the specific plan is intended to accommodate.
On Route 66, there's not a whole lot of on-street parking available on Route 66, is there?
I mean, in some places there, I don't know how many spaces, but, you know, that's always subject to change for traffic reasons.
The question is, we talk about mixed use going forward. I love the idea of getting rid of the requirement for mixed use, making it still available, you know, if a developer wants to do it, and if it's something the public's interested in. But, you know, one of the things I see that's happened is we've had mixed-use properties where there's a tremendous amount of residential and a very, very minimum amount of commercial property put into play. And my understanding of mixed use is more of the people that are going to be living there, are going to be working in the area. And, you know, is there any kind of a definition? I mean, can you build a 200,000 square foot apartment building and have a 500 square foot commercial space in the bottom, and is that still considered mixed use? Is there any kind of standard that's in place for that?
I think among the many weaknesses of the specific plan, of which there are many, there is no clear definition of what mixed use is. And I think that as part of this update, and I think a lot of people, I'm one of them, am not really convinced of the universally acceptance of mixed use everywhere, which is what the specific plan calls for. I think that's one of the things we need to clarify through this update in areas where we're going to entertain mixed use or allow it, is how much is necessary in a building, if you're going to do vertical mixed use. And I think that's what you're talking about. There's not a definition of that, but I think most people, it was just assumed that vertical mixed use is residential, is commercial below with residential above. But there's not a definition.
So the state of California has no definition.
Well, there probably is a definition out there somewhere, but I'm saying it's not in the specific plan.
David, if I can jump in for a
Sure.
second. When we talk about incentives going forward, I think one of the keys that we need to not lose sight of is there's got to be some equity balance there. If we look at Avalon Bay, the incentives are what grew that building to the size and the height and density that it is. Yet in return, we got 4,000 square foot retail space or commercial space, which is going back to Gary's question. That's not a fair trade-off. And whatever incentive plan we come up with, there has to be a benefit to us also as a city to allow that incentive to go forward.
few more questions. You know, one of the things that we talked about in the specific plan and in the review of it quite extensively was the fact that one of the goals of the plan was to increase employment, daytime population in the city by having more places for people to work. And I think that's something, what we've seen recently has been a lot of residential and not a lot of commercial area. And I just think that's something, and it looks like it is going forward, that is something that Glendora truly needs. This is a great bedroom community, but as far as the daytime population, in order to have enough people that are here spending their money during the day for larger restaurants and retailers and that type of thing to be here in Glendora, I think that's really important that we do concentrate on that. I think it was Mike asked the question about the structure. When we take a look at the 3 stories, within here, a lot of places it talks about, sometimes it says so many stories or so much the height. Sometimes they'll talk about stories with a slash in the height.
Right.
I think it's important that we identify that if we're looking at a maximum of 3 stories and a maximum of 45 feet, it needs to be 3 stories and 45 feet. So there's no misunderstanding going forward. But the big question is, when we talk about a 45-foot structure, are we talking about the very top of the roof line as opposed to where the top of the 3rd floor ceiling would be? And that in the current specific plan, there's language in there, a number of places to talk about architectural features that allow for higher properties. And I think that just needs to be clarified and really spelled out to make sure exactly what that is. And then with the architectural design, whether that's going to be pitched roof or flat roof type of architecture, that will take that into play. But from what I see, it looks like that is being addressed in the suggestions.
Can I hear from planning commission to see how that was addressed?
Well, I think that, at least from my perspective, it's something that was left unclear. It was unclear in there, and so I think it was taken advantage of in some instances. But I don't think that the Route 66 committee wanted a bunch of boxes along the Route 66. So the architectural features were something that was encouraged, so that it had some identification to it other than it being just a box.
I guess,
We need to work through that.
I guess my question was, as the planning commission was discussing 3-story, 45 feet, did that include facade, or was the facade in addition to 45 feet?
Well, I think we're still trying to define those aspects of it to allow for architecture variations to be included in our future development. So, I mean, we could easily build a 3-story building at 32 or 35 feet, but it'd have to have a flat roof, and I don't think we want to get stuck in that. So it's going to take a little bit of discussion back and forth to determine what is fair for us to use as an ultimate number and still allow for architectural changes.
So I'll try to answer that question about, I think the discussion occurred and that there was a consideration of where 3 stories was more appropriate along the corridor, but that there also might be some exceptions to that. So certain sub-districts where higher height still could be considered, especially near the metro, but we didn't get into exactly where. I think we kind of left that open, that we should specify in the future exactly where that should happen, so it is more clear. But we didn't get to the point in this document, as far as our discussion, at this point on where that should be.
We wanted to hear from you a little bit.
And
I'll just add one
Oh,
other
go
part.
ahead.
That it's my understanding as well that the height requirement is a maximum, not a minimum, of course. but that maximum can be penetrated by different features, not just architectural, but mechanical. The elevator shaft that has to go, the equipment that goes on top of the building for the elevators, as well as HVAC and things of that nature. And so I have a concern there that if we're going to allow that to happen, that we're at least honest with the public to say, yeah, 45 feet means this, plus what could go on top are these few things. But I concur that we've discussed the issue, but not come to any formal recommendation on that by.
Ken, last question, I promise. What is the difference with something being a medical campus rather than just being zoned for office?
Well, it would be, you would have an area of that city that the uses were, let's say, for example, if you wanted to limit them to various types of medical uses, however you wanted to define that. And in some places, that does exist. I mean, for example, Covina, in the area around the community hospital, is zoned exclusively medical. So you cannot, all of the commercial uses, the immediate area, part of it are supposed to be medical. So that's one version of what that might be. But as we go through this, we could define, if that idea is embraced by the council, we could define it however we wanted to.
I guess what I think about, if you've got a medical campus, a true medical campus, and somebody wants to put a restaurant in the area where the people that work in the medical campus want to eat, is something like that considered or allowed, or are there real restrictions when you define something as a medical campus?
You can define it however you want to. And for example, in the TCO subdistrict, which is exclusively an office commercial subdistrict, if you wanted to do, for example, something like that did not fall into one of the light industrial, high-tech categories of uses, you could do it, but it would have to be an ancillary use to the main use, which was, let's say if you had a hospital, there's a lot of, like Children's Hospital has a McDonald's in it, right? So that's not a medical use per se, probably not good for you, you see it really not. But you can incorporate that type of flexibility, and we do to some degree already in the specific contracts.
Excuse me, Mr. Kugel, on that note, are we able to define or specify for the council the issues surrounding that property we're talking about and where it sits right now and the issues that they're trying to deal with and what we would have to do to maybe make changes to allow them to improve that property?
I think we're at the very early stages of fleshing that out. We have at least 2 property owners who came to us during the hearings and discussions on the specific plan for medical owners who have various, I think, hopes and dreams about what they are trying to accomplish. And I think part of, updating the specific plan would be to, better flesh those ideas out and how committed the hospital and the other medical office building are to this idea. But they at least approached the commission and said, hey, we have this ongoing concern here, and we don't want to be zoned out because this is a mixed-use district. They wanted to stay, and they want to make an investment in the area.
Okay, thank you very much.
Can I ask a question on that, on the campus? In the town center mixed-use proposed revise, where we identifies the property call-outs, you have the Route 66 Hospital Medical. Is that the existing property, or are we including additional property in that?
It includes additional property. If you want me to, I'll point out here, I got it on the screen. So this parcel here is the hospital. This parcel here is the medical building. And then these currently are a variety of commercial and residential uses. So this would be added to that district.
But the only residential that would be added would be what's fronting Wendover Avenue right now, to the west.
Nothing to the west in that.
Quick question. Just on
Yes.
that same topic, So I think Glendora is very lucky to have 2 hospitals, and there are many communities that would really be eager to have just one. And since the medical practice and kind of how hospitals function is changing so dramatically, I think we would need to kind of pay attention to the needs of both when it comes to serving the public, having appropriate medical space around it for doctors to lease space. There's some synergy between the 2 hospitals that I don't pretend to understand, but I think it does exist. And that other hospitals are going toward kind of a continuum of care as well. So between the rehab centers and convalescent hospitals, and rehab, I mean also kind of elder care, but that's all part of the future. And I think we would have to consider for both hospitals some flexibility for that to occur, because as they are trying to grow and trying to keep up with kind of the various demands of the medical industry, they're going to have to go through some probably kind of odd hoops on refinancing and kind of showing that they're going to be able to comply with different standards. And I think I would try and discourage us from getting too much in front of that with lots of restrictions. And the idea of kind of a medical block with flexibility, I think, is a good thing.
And I guess that was part of where I was heading with this is, are we boxing ourselves in by only including these current campus and the residential that fronts Glendora? And if we want to at some point grow that campus, what do we do?
Well, let me back up. A theme out of all these recommendations is to start talking to some people that actually are involved in these services and not try to outthink them. So I think the premise, if the premises are on track, I think the logical next step is to really talk about people that do commercial, do office, do medical, and really see what they say are their needs. And then I think legitimately the community and the legislative bodies can then decide, is that worth it? But us standing here right now, we probably all have a different vision of what that is and what it takes, but we're not in those fields. And so I think that's the next step we would urge your consent with, is to really get into those people that build this stuff and say, okay, what do you see is going to happen in your field over the next 10, 15 years? And what does it take for that to be accomplished? And then we can wrap that up and say, this is what we've heard, and what do you think of that?
And that discussion is part of the economic market analysis.
All those things, yes.
And that's why I think that's such an important point, and many of the questions and comments that have been made tonight all go back to that same topic. The incentives and all of that go with the idea of doing that market and economic analysis. Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I will try to keep my thoughts brief. First of all, thank you for an excellent job. I know there's been a lot of folks that probably didn't think that you would open the box and really look into it, but I really do think that you really looked at everything. This is a great start, and I applaud the fact that you have acknowledged that there are some things that haven't worked. There are some things that need to work. And I applaud the fact that there are some things that you think could possibly work. And we haven't just kind of done it and kicked the can down the road. So I really appreciate the effort, the scrutiny, the wisdom that you have, shown. And so thank you. And I am looking forward to seeing where this plan just keeps going. I don't know if Mike really got his question answered, but just from a technical standpoint, Jeff, what is a story? Is it 10 feet tall, or is it a variance?
So a story is measured in feet.
Okay.
It's defined as basically the space between the floor and the ceiling. But really, and I know that it's confusing because the specific plan and other parts of the zoning code are written in a way that says 3 stories or X number of feet or X number of feet, but no taller than so many stories. And so it's really, for purposes of looking at, I think, what the community is concerned about is really height. You know, if you have a 45-foot tall building, they'll probably accommodate a 3-story building, but probably not a 4. You know, if we're talking about, where does, I think there was a question about where does the roof end, where do architectural features begin? There is language in the code about allowing, I think it says 15 additional feet for architectural features. That can be modified or kept the same, but really when you're looking at, buildings and how tall you think they should be, the number of feet is what you should be looking at.
I just want to add, and there's some logic behind that, because especially with mixed use, your bottom floor can have a variety of range because of the use. So if you have a restaurant use or something like that where you need a lot of equipment in your ceiling, you're going to need a higher ceiling level in that first floor than an office building would have floor, or residential. And the same with some residentials, you can have those vaulted ceilings. So again, that's why I just stay away from a story is exactly 11 feet 6 inches, is because the use will determine it. And so that's why we typically rely on the pitch, where the highest point of the roof is to the ground floor is usually how we will measure it in general terms.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, I'd also like to direct you to answer what this lady asked about where our mortuary is going. I've also heard it's going to be a geisha bath, a Roman bath, all kinds of different things. So maybe you could kind of squelch some of the stuff, at least for the moment.
Yeah, well, it sounds very interesting.
Yeah, it does.
Well, in 2009, the city received an application to, I assume we're talking about the old mortuary building on Route 66 next to the doctor's office.
Right.
The doctors who own that office building, or at least at the time, a lot of time has passed, they owned that mortuary, old, it's been closed as well. And they submitted an application to tear down the mortuary building and develop a banquet facility. And that was approved by the Planning Commission in 2009. That the approval of that application has lapsed. They never pulled permits to build that project, so they just let it go for whatever reason. Since that time, 2009, we've not received any more applications to do anything with that property. So it's all rumors that you're hearing.
There you go. Thank
One
you.
other rumor on there. Can you address the historic value of that property?
Right now? No, I think, I think if I'm going to go by memory, and I hate to do this because I want to think that building dates back to probably the 20s. I can't recall if it was built as a mortuary or it was used as a house originally. I recall that there have been some additions that were done to it in the 40s, but I don't remember specifically the story. It's not a landmark, if that's what you're asking. It's not a landmark, no, and it's not in a historic district. It's not a contributing structure, so the value of the building is for its own architectural value.
And any potential project right now would have to come back with a development plan that would have to be approved by the Planning Commission.
Yes.
Thank you, and I hope that has helped some of this. I came here tonight really not having a lot of things to ask, because I wanted to hear. And I really appreciate those that have gotten up to, speak. I only wish that there were more, because this has been an issue that has divided us at times. But I really want to applaud those that got up and spoke, because you had some excellent points. Cliff, you said you'd like to hear from us.
There isn't any reason for us to make recommendations to you that you think are crazy. So are we on the right track? And
I think
where do we need? Just call us and we'll let you know.
Well, I would offer this, that I do think that you are definitely on the right track, and I would support where you are going. I am tending to land on 45 feet, 45, 50 feet, but I do think, as has been said, we have to really define that. Because I think there's been a lot of wiggle room. I understand that, I get that, but I think this gives us a really good chance to better define what height is and depth is and all of the points. Process, I'm really am anxious for bullet point 1 to start, Chris. We got the economic update that was done in '03, and I scanned it, but I'm anxious to hear what those people are obviously saying now. And Chris, I think that you're absolutely right. We need to go out and talk to those folks that will develop, use, run the points that we are talking about. We're all smart, but we're not as smart as some of those guys are. So I would really support that. Small lots. I've been around here for 30 plus years, as a lot of us have. And these maps are amazing. That one map where it goes north and then jets west, where did that come from? That must have been some crazy sort of orange grove or something at one time. But we have to do something to consolidate lots and make it a viable plan, because as all of us have seen, there are some amazingly small lots and quite just really some odd lots, either width, depth, or a combo thereof. So I would hope that we would do that. My concerns are incentives. We need to better define that. And I know that you guys are looking at that and talking about that, but that's a concern that I have. The amount of density, I'm not sure where I'm landing there, but I'm concerned about that. Traffic flow is something that is incredibly important. Chris is right. We are dealing with, roads. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about roads. And we have to do a lot to bring our roads back to where we would like. So I want to make sure that we really talk just about that. And lastly, Chris, do you know when, or maybe the question is, what authority or what do we need to do to get bullet point 1 going with the economic and market assessment?
A great question, and I think Jeff has alluded to it. As part of our strategic plan, we sort of anticipated this, and so he's going to be coming back in January with a budget saying this is how much money we would think we need for services like architectural, economic, market, and all those type of things, and show that to the council, and we get a blessing on all or most of it, so that we can engage those services. But we do believe time is of the essence to keep everything going and keep the momentum going, so that so if we can do that as early in January as we can, I think that'd be our goal.
Great.
Should I add to that?
Sure.
In that thinking and in that work, what is the possibility of bringing somebody in who we already have people that go out and talk, but can go out to the real world, to the places where developers lay and say, hey, this is what we have, we'd like to show it to you. That would be obviously another expense, but in some cases, that's what you meet the first time around when you're out looking for property. Developers will end up having those people come to them and say, here's what we got, are you interested?
Well, I think that that's sort of subdivisions of the economic analysis that we would be taking a look at, and Jeff just did.
So just to wrap up what what I feel. Thank you once again for launching us and getting us going, and I would urge and nudge and encourage you to continue to look at this. This is a document that now has, life, and it needs to take even more life. And so thank you for enabling us to begin to talk about this, because we just needed to do that. And I think we're on the right track, Jeff and Chris, and I would support moving ahead as rapidly and as prudently as, we probably should. So thank you.
Mrs. Dawson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I want to echo a great thanks to Jeff for doing such a thorough report throughout this entire process, and to all of the commissioners for your diligence in the work that you've done on this, and your very thoughtful consideration of all of the concerns that have been voiced. The citizens, thank you so much for your participation. It's critical to have input from the community as we're doing this. So I've watched every meeting. I have been very impressed with the conversations, and it has certainly been what I was expecting to have at the end of this, a very thoughtful look at every piece of the Route 66 plan and consideration of where things need to be changed. As far as my specific concerns, I think, as has been stated, development incentives really need to be looked at carefully. I recognize we need to give them to get some of the more difficult sites developed on, and it's going to take a lot of creativity to figure that out. But that's certainly something that needs to be addressed. One of the things that's concerned me since the beginning of our bigger developments is the lack of the requirement that those developments have to sit right on the street, that there is no setback flexibility. And it concerns me because these buildings are big, and without setbacks you can't really landscape properly, and then you're left with a big, huge, it looks so much bigger than it needs to look. I've been in other areas where buildings are this big, but they are, it doesn't look as much when there's a lot of landscaping around them and maybe some courtyards in between. So I think, and we also want to encourage people to walk, and if you have wider streets with landscaping on both sides of the streets, it's much more comfortable for walking, for just feeling like you're not right next to the traffic, and for feeling like it's a more beautiful place to walk. The TCMU district, breaking it down into more districts, that it makes sense to me to do that, and especially the conversation about the medical, I think is a really important thing to look at. I'd be very interested in what the economic analysis says regarding the possibility of medical becoming a big part of that area. It would be terrific to think that it could really grow, because if our hospitals draw more doctors and more laboratories, and they're going to need facilities, and that would really be an excellent way to develop that area. I had a question regarding setbacks on, if you give me a second, I'll find the page. One of the districts, the Service Commercial District, which has such narrow lots, and it says that the buildings must be set back at least 20 feet from the street. And I'm wondering in that district if they really need to have that setback, which while the narrowness of the lots is such a problem to begin with, maybe that would be a district that putting them closer to the street would give a little bit more room for a developer to do something. So, do you have any thought about that, Jeff? Is there a reason that it has to be 20 feet back?
I think typically they're, with the setback, they're trying to accommodate a particular type of aesthetic look from the street. They're trying to provide some space for a landscape buffer between the sidewalk and the buildings. They're also trying to, I think that you alluded to, even in the residential areas, which is a big void in the TCMU and the Brighton Gateway, putting buildings on the street without taking into account an adequate pedestrian area. And actually, you have cars, speed on some parts of Route 66 is probably 45, 50 miles an hour. So in order for that to be hospitable, you need a space between not only the way of building, but having a landscape area, sidewalk area, and building, but also something that's adequate for pedestrians where they feel safe. And so I think that's why the RSC and other districts include that type of setback.
Okay.
Could I respond to that too? Since I was around when the thing was written. There was a lot of discussion during that period of time related to whether parking was in front. If you developed a shopping area or something, was the parking in front or was it behind? And so I think that in the development of the program, some places it got put behind and some places it got put in front. But I think over the period of time, related to the safety issues, kind of came to the thought that parking in front was probably the best so that it could be seen from the street.
Thank you. I noticed in the report that we got, Jeff, that you mentioned, or maybe it was watching it on one of the meetings, you mentioned wanting to add in the TCMU, I think it was detached condo, attached townhomes, and stacked flats. Did I hear that right?
I think what I was trying to do in that discussion of the TCMU was to try to sort of shed light on, okay, the market is definitely bringing housing. What types of housing are out there that can be built? So I was really just reciting the variety of different multifamily housing products and trying to make the point that depending on what you want, what we envision for the corridor to accommodate, that we have development standards that would help accommodate that housing type. And as an example, the development standards in the TCMU are really strictly oriented around vertical mixed use. There's really no other good option within the context of those development standards. If we want to allow things like attached townhomes, which are different density and mass, then we need to have different types of development standards. So I was trying to make the point that we should be, and I think that's where the market analysis will help flesh out, okay, in the next 10 to 20 years, what's likely to be attracted to this area given sites we have available and where the housing market is for what they are.
Okay, so that would be something that would be considered.
Yes, yeah. So hopefully that makes sense? Okay.
And then, if you could explain a little bit more about the state greenhouse gas reduction mandates, how is that impacting our plan?
I think those were put in because those are state laws that whenever we analyze new development or a new plan, part of the function is to analyze the impact on greenhouse gases, and in particular, the impact on the number of car trips that a project will generate. The state is moving forward under the California Environmental Quality Act. They're moving away from analyzing traffic impacts based on the volume of cars, and instead moving in the direction of having cities and projects be analyzed against the number of trips they will generate as an impact on additional greenhouse gases. So as that plays into our planning, particularly around the future gold mine station, the state views, and as we analyze projects, and encourages the addition of housing and other things around transit and things that are going to reduce car trips. And that is, when we're talking about greenhouse gases, that's really the big push, is to sort of encourage development pattern that reduces car trips. Now, in Glendora, a very car-oriented city, that if we look 20 years from now, I think about a month ago, there was the anniversary of it, Reduce Out Back in the Future, and it was a big deal about October 15, 2015, whatever the date was, we're all going to be flying around in cars, and 30 years ago. Well, that didn't happen. And I would imagine that while, we need to we plan for things, and particularly around the Gold Line station, and provide opportunities for people to walk places to reduce car trips, to address the greenhouse gases. The challenge in our planning is that we're still very car-oriented, and we need to do that as well. So, but that's what we'll be focusing on.
And is there a standard that we're going to be forced to meet, a state standard of some sort?
Yeah,
Not yet.
Not yet. But again, I think there's a couple of things, and I think the planning commission pulled it. What we can see today and what will be 20 years from now is hard to envision. I mean, who would have ever thought internet sales, for example, the impact it's had on retail? 3D printers. That's done and opened up from those things. So, I mean, they're testing out driverless cars. You saw the picture of LA Times now, Mayor Garcetti was personally in the car today showing how it's going to do this. Uber. Those type of impacts that are already happening, and you can't imagine today what it will be like for the millennials and the generations after them, how they will adapt to that and use that as their standard living. I mean, it's easy for us to say, I wouldn't just call up some unknown person and say, can you pick me up? But I can tell you, millennials and other people find that, what's the big deal? And so that's a reality in planning that's going to happen. I think the state is saying, we're pushing that way. And so while it may not be mandates now, I think it's not unexpected to find that Sacramento is eventually going to make it such a incentive to do what they wish you to do, whether that's through a stick or a carrot, that we're going to see those influences in land use planning every community.
Thank you. Well, to Mrs. Shade's concerns about the traffic, maybe that will be a surprising change.
We have
to
loading
reduce,
and unloading instead of parking.
yeah, to reduce traffic, maybe something we're not anticipating as much might change. I think that economic analysis is where we need to go, and I strongly approve of going forward with that. We've talked about the tech industry, and maybe that would be an appropriate, maybe we would be able to think of attracting more tech businesses into the area, and I'd be interested in if the analysis would talk about that. And then lastly, one of our speakers talked about the need for clarity in our standards, and I would urge that we make sure that we have very clear standards without a lot of wiggle room in them. And I don't know if Tina Gonzalez was asking about the incentives and saying there was some confusion in that. Do you have any thoughts toward that, Jeff? She was talking about the incentive chart and talking about how that was sort of confusing.
Well, if I understood her correctly, I think she was talking about things that weren't explicitly stated in the synopsis of the recommendations.
Okay.
And on one hand, you have some cases you're very explicit about items of technologies. And I think my only response to that is that, I mean, these recommendations are a starting point, to move forward with updating the specific plans. Sort of the final decision when we actually rewrite new standards, that will be explicit within whatever revisions are made to the specific plan.
To summarize my thoughts, as I said at the beginning, the Planning Commission, the citizens, and Planning Department, I think, have done an outstanding job moving us to this point, and I look forward to the next stage of the work that you'll be doing for us. Thank you.
Mayor Prisco?
Thank you. I too want to thank staff and Planning Commission for the work they've done on this to date, and the community for their involvement. Cliff, you asked the question, are you on the right track? I think you've heard from 4 of us so far that would indicate, yes, you are on the right track. I'm very encouraged by what we're seeing. I too look forward to the economic analysis, the market analysis, because I think that's going to be the driving force behind this. Mendel and Gary and Judy have asked and have clarified most of the questions that I think any of us could have at this point. I will say that when it comes to incentives, we are going to have to be extremely creative, because on the one hand, we are going to need incentives to allow developers, to entice developers to develop on some of those small parcels that we're talking about. But on the other, I can tell you that I'm not a fan of any incentive that's going to give increased height to what we were seeing at the corner of Grand or Route 66 and Glenwood Avenue. And again, I go back to the balance there. There's got to be a trade-off or whatever incentives that we allow. Setbacks, I too am encouraged to hear that the Planning Commission and staff are looking at increasing the setbacks in certain areas because I think it is needed. And finally, I am in complete support of breaking down the town center mixed use, and I really appreciate how it's being proposed. A question that I would have would be, in particular, the medium density residential area. Most of that right now is R2 and R3, am I correct?
I believe immediately, like for example, if you look at property, this area here, the area to the north is, I believe it's all R3. And then when you get on Foothill Boulevard, it changes to a commercial zoning district.
Do you recall what the area was prior to it being part of the town center mixed use?
I don't have that information.
I guess where I'm going is if it's eventually going to be R2, R3 mixed medium density, what would stop us from doing that almost immediately? So that's something we need to it doesn't need to be answered tonight, but I think something we need to look at. And then finally, my last question is, I know the economic and market analysis comes first, but how soon thereafter do we get into site design examples?
You know, I think that's part of what I've got to go back and think about is not only cost, but sort of timeline and implementation, because this can be sort of, I act as general contractor and I can sub out all these things and handle a lot of the rewriting in-house, or the Aero Highway Specific Plan where we're turning sort of it over to a general contractor who then subs all of these things out. Usually the economic analysis comes first while we're sort of brainstorming and working on a site or a land use policy scenario. I think that the economic analysis is going to drive, or should drive at least, a fair amount of the land use decisions and the way we set things up.
And just a last comment in terms, and Judy talked about it, in terms of language, is the clarity of this document has to be far superior to what the existing specific plan is. And I know everybody's on agreement that that's what we're trying to go to.
I would like that.
Yeah, I think we all do. With that, I'll turn it back to Mira, but again, I want to thank the community for their involvement, staff for their involvement, and Planning Commission. You guys have done one heck of a job. You should be very proud.
And I go back to the Planning Commission. Chairman Matthews or any other commissioners, did you have any other comments or questions that you would like to share?
Just one, if I could. First of all, I'm going to drift a little bit outside our normal venue here and agree with Mr. Smith that, you know what, this document is a living, breathing part of our community. And I think we have to keep that in mind because as we can look back and see from the 2000 model or 2003 model, things changed and we did not address them in a real-time fashion and allow ourselves the opportunity to make the changes that could have maybe meant something different today. So going forward, as much as we would like to sit here and be 30 years down the road and say, you know what, it worked perfect, the reality is, I think, that it's not going to happen that way. So we have to be able to adjust as we go along. Unfettered, obviously, and be able to react as things change. Outside of that, I really appreciate the opportunity. I think all my partners here have done a yeoman's job, and we look forward to taking the 8 boxes that we have created so far and define them in a better fashion and come back to you with more defined, finished results so that we can move forward. And with that, I close my end.
Yes, Mr. Hamlin.
We've had 2 landowners here tonight that spoke. And it seems to me that, and I know that we're in a moratorium, but we don't have people standing at our door, banging it down to come in and do development. And it seems to me that if the recommendations are making sense, then maybe we don't have to reinvent the whole thing before we allow some things to go ahead. We have the Watt project, and we have the gentleman that spoke about the property across the street. If there are ways to move those projects ahead as we continue in this process, if they fit within what seems reasonable and within our recommendations, personally, it's probably a bias, but I'd like to see us not hold up those projects, but that we find a way to put them ahead, because they don't seem to be out of the mainstream of what we have talked about and you have said we're in the right direction. So when we have owners saying we want to develop and they seem to fit within the process, the move that we're making, I'd like to see us find a way to move this ahead.
I guess to piggyback on what Cliff's asking and getting right to the point is what's to stop us from pulling, if we go to the proposed revise, what's to stop us from pulling 2 of the sections out almost immediately?
Well, if the question is to try to prioritize the multifamily rezoning element of the TCU, we can move forward with that. I think, again, it's going to be a discussion of, is it R3, R2, and how does that play out? But that can move faster. Any of these elements can move a little bit faster if that's the desire of the council. But I would probably, because this isn't agendized for this, and be very careful that it's something we can revisit and discuss and move forward. But it is going to take some zoning change. So there's some documents that have to come with that process.
Jeff, if you would you just give a brief explanation of an R2 or R3 zoning?
R2 or R3, are the 2 of the city's multiple family zoning districts. R2, they have, generally speaking, they allow 2-story multifamily development. So apartments, condos, townhomes. The real fundamental difference between those 2 districts is the density. R2 allows, I believe, a range of, let's say, 10 to 15 units to the acre. R3 will allow a range up to about 20, 22 units to the acre. So the difference in those 2 multi-family zoning districts, while they're very similar, is the density that they'll allow. Height and everything else is all the same.
Thanks.
I'd like to say something. Cliff Hamlin stole what I was talking about. I agree with him 100% because I see now for sure that what we're presenting to you to look at is so closely done. I don't see anything changing and major. We can go ahead with it if possible, if it's legal. I think that would be a great opportunity to to keep moving. I will leave you with this. Parking, for me, is an important part of any project that we do. And that's because I'm retired and I go around to places. I go around to places and I see that there's no parking. I mean, there is parking, but there's no parking. And 7 minutes later, I'm still driving around. That's up in the village area, by the way. And I'm thinking, we don't want to put the cars out on the, in the gutter, because the other day when I came down out of the driveway, the car was right there, and I couldn't see for 5 or 6 cars back. So I'm just saying, playing out inside our project is extremely important in my opinion.
Thank you. Mr. Kugel, anything else you need from us to be able to proceed forward with the next steps?
No, I think I have figured out direction and glad that I was able to get you on all terms of the council on moving forward.
Well, again, thank you very much to you and your staff. Thank you again to the Planning Commission. And thank you to the residents who came out. And with that, we are adjourned.